Everyone who's here. Welcome everyone who's on Facebook joining us. We're going to be diving into this week's Torah portion. Oh, good. Michael is back. We lost him for a second there. And hi, Frank. So good to see you as well. We're going to be diving into the beginning of the book of Exodus. The book of Genesis is so long that it always strikes me as this big moment where we reach the end of Genesis and we get to start the book of Exodus, and part of all the drama that happens, particularly in the first Torah portion. And I think it's actually quite wise and fitting that the midah, the soul trait that we're focusing on this week, is one of courage, because we see courage outlined in this particular Torah portion so many times. And of course, we're going into some of them based on the Musar Torah commentary, but there are so many more that we're not even going into, because if we really did a full study of the entire Torah portion and how courage plays out, it would be a master course. There's so much within that material in the Midrashim. But before we dive into that, let us say our blessing together for studying Torah and immersing ourselves in words of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav ve'etzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah hafok ba la'asok b'divrei Torah yadadai Wonderful. Let me get this text sheet up for all of us. Can everyone see that okay? Yes? Is that all right? Okay, good. So I want us just to start talking about this concept of Omet's lev. This concept, Omet means strength, and Omet's lev, the word lev, of course, means heart. So when we discuss Omet's lev, the literal translation is heart strength. And it's often described as a kind of moral courage, giving us the strength to persevere even in difficult times. One of the places that it comes up is this pretty famous line in Psalm 27, where it uses the words right here. For anyone who can read Hebrew, you can see v'ya mitz libecha. That's like strength of heart or courage that's coming up there. Look to the eternal, be strong and of good courage. Oh, look to the eternal. And so I wanted to start with the discussion of, what do you think is the relationship between strength and courage?
Well, it takes strength to be courageous.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship between strength and courage, the relationship between courage and one's heart. Like, why do you think this kind of playing of words is going on here? What do you make of it? It definitely takes strength in order to be courageous, but what kind of strength?
Well,
Maybe, oh, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, the strength and courage. I mean, with strength alone could be for the positive or negative, but if we're acting in the way of trying to do God's work in the lives that we live on earth, then it takes courage at times to do this work and these acts and deeds with loving kindness, even though they might not be popular time to do them, to do the right thing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. Sari, what did you want to say?
Well, I was on that note, I was going to say, I wrote here moral strength, which Michael essentially is talking about. But yeah, it's not always easy to write to sometimes people want to take the easy way out, like my grandson would say. And anyhow, and it takes strength and moral conviction to, the courage to follow what your heart believes that is the right thing to do.
Yeah. And like we saw that with Joseph, right? That came up in so many different ways where Joseph believed it is the right thing to do to not accept Potiphar's wife's advances, right? I need to be true to myself. And he faced incredible consequences as a result of that. Like he acted in a way where he was true to himself and his moral convictions, even when it put him in harm's way. And at the end of the day, we can look back at Joseph and say, wow, what a courageous man he was. What a great forefather he was for our people. But at that moment, that is very much not what the feeling was that anyone had. It was just him by himself having to deal with the stickiness of that whole situation and his own convictions.
I see you have another question here, which makes a lot of sense to me, because I don't think that this strength and courage is always positive. It depends on the kavanah, your intentions, and what you could be very strong in your belief, but that may not be what's positive and best for others.
So could you give an example of something like that? Sorry.
Well, Hitler was very strong and courageous when you want to think about what he did, but obviously we know what that outcome was.
Yeah, thank you. For sure. Who was trying to speak a second ago who I inadvertently interrupted? Sorry.
Okay, it was Frank. That's okay.
Hi, Frank.
Hi. Strength is something that you're even kind of born with. It's a physical, right? Boys go through puberty early, so they get a little bit stronger. They have strength more than a girl that's, you know what I mean, because of our body mass. That's stuff that we can, but courage is something spiritual, something deep, something that you stand up even when you know you don't have the strength to stand up to a bully or to someone being bullied. That's strength. If I had strength, then I will stand up for myself against a bully. The courage is for me to stand up for somebody else, even if I don't have the strength to do it. That's just the way I take it.
Yeah, it sounds like you're saying also that moral courage actually requires like more strength.
Yeah.
Because we have to persevere over another obstacle. Yeah, Jessica, please.
Yeah, I have to admit, I've been reading Timothy Snyder's book, Bloodlands, which is about Hitler, the 30s and 40s between Hitler and Stalin. And I just finished the chapter on the Warsaw Rebellion. There was the Warsaw Ghetto Rebellion. And then a year later, there was a city rebellion. And one of the things that the author talks about is like the courage of the people, the courage they had to have to stand up against the Nazis. And in the second rebellion, which was not just the Jews, but it was the whole city of Warsaw, one of the things that distinguishes them is they had nothing to lose. Their women and children were gone. Everything was gone. They had nothing to lose. And yet they still had the courage to stand up against the Germans. So I could babble on about this forever, but it's an amazing story to read.
Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to say one thing that I even wrote a little post-it to myself the other day. that I am so impressed with the moral strength and courage of, I think her name is Liz Cheney, the one who is standing up for what she feels is right against, and one or two others. And I'm not getting into politics so much as that this is a woman who really has spoken the truth as and not just her truth, but maybe God's truth to counteract everything else that the people in the rest of her party are. Maybe they feel her way, but they don't have the courage to agree with her. So anyway, I think that she is an example of what we're going to be reading about.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. And as I'm thinking through like all of these comments that people are offering, there was something that struck me when I was going through this week's Torah portion, which is this focus on love, this focus on heart. And we know that it comes up in a variety of ways in this Torah portion and in the Torah portions to follow, because as we often hear, the Torah says that Pharaoh had a hardened heart. Now, the language around the hardening of Pharaoh's heart is progressive and it's not always consistent, but there is a larger notion of Pharaoh's heart being hardened. But here we're talking about a heart of strength or having heart strength. And the difference between, like, I wonder if maybe some of what we're talking to right now is really kind of getting to the differences between an Omet lev, a heart that has strength, and a kabed lev or a kaved lev, that a heavy or a hardened heart. Wonder if anyone has any more thoughts on just the differences between having a courageous or a strong heart versus a hardened heart. We can also, sorry, Shelley, did you want to say something?
Yeah, when I think of a hardened heart, I think of a heart that doesn't feel one way or the other. The heart is not engaged in life at all. It's disengaged. It doesn't care. It doesn't require courage because it just is. Whereas a courageous heart is filled many times with angst on what is the right thing to do, what is the loving thing to do, because you might feel compelled to stand your ground on a certain thing and it might not be loving. So there isn't, I think the angst comes with that heart that's really in a process of discerning what is the right thing to do for someone else. Yeah, so that's what I want to say.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that in. I mean, it's so interesting that this story of Exodus, even from its very first verses, it's all about this time of like struggle and turmoil. Mm-hmm. And I think it's really important that it starts from that place, because having a Omet lev as opposed to a kabed lev, that is a choice that is made based on the circumstances, right? We can either choose to open up our hearts and to try to meet other people's needs, to make ourselves more vulnerable, which is in itself an act of being courageous, or we can put up lots and lots of walls and barriers to protect ourselves, which is not an act of courage at all.
Right.
So I want us to look, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Jessica.
Oh, I'm sorry, going back to Bloodlands, my feeling about the people who lived through those times was they didn't have a choice. They didn't have a choice about whether to be courageous or to harden their hearts. Most of the Jews at that time had no choice about what was going to happen to them. And that really changes the picture for me about life. I'm not quite sure where to go with this, but it's really weighing on me about that they had no choices.
Yeah,
I'll
you're
stop
right. There
there.
is a difference because there is some freedom that does exist in our story, right? That people don't always have that luxury. I think that's an important thing to keep in our minds as we're talking through that. Thank you for bringing that in, Jessica. I want to take us just to the very beginning of this portion, not the very first verses, but shortly thereafter, when Joseph died, right? And it says, Joseph died and all his brothers and all that generation. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly so that the land was filled with them. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground. So what's happening within this text for both the Israelites and also for this new king who arose in Egypt? Like essentially he's seeing a threat and his response is to do what?
Protect himself. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear him.
His response is to protect himself, to lash out, to protect himself, to see them as enemies, to respond really to his fear, which is not courageous.
Yeah, it's so interesting too, because like sometimes people feel like the way in which to kind of act on power is to, put down hard lines. This is what it is. Everyone is bad. Like,
yeah.
And it's not really an act of strength, is it?
No, fear.
Yeah, I would just, obviously this is a tribal mentality. These are the other.
Yeah.
And we're preemptive, like the Romans, that was their whole game plan,
Good point.
To, go eradicate the potential threat before it materializes.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's kind of our starting point, exactly, for this entire story is this discrepancy.
Mm-hmm.
So with that in mind, I want to go into Shifra and Puah, who are discussed quite extensively in the Dvar Torah for this week. And you see that there's words in bold here. If you read the reading, you'll understand why they're in bold, and we'll get back to that in a second. For right now, I just want to read through this text. Does anyone want to read this in the English?
I will.
Thank you, Jessica.
I'll read the first few verses. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of which was named Shifra and the other Puah, saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. Okay, next person.
I can read.
I
I can
Thanks,
read.
Sari.
And God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. And because the midwives feared God, he established households for them.
Okay, great. So just looking at this verse, it's quite remarkable what's going on here, right? This act of bravery, really kind of disobeying the orders of this really kind of scary leader among the new king of Egypt. and saying, well, it's not our fault. These women aren't like other women, right? So in the Torah commentary, or actually, this is from the Torah, a woman's commentary. This is from elsewhere. It talked about this play on words, and this was also in the Musar Torah commentary that it spoke to this a little bit as well. But Susan Nidich said, to the ruler worried about a people that, that should say swarms, and fills the land, Shifra and Pua claim that the Israelite women are chayot, vigorous. We might know that the word chaya in Hebrew, it comes from the root to live, but it also can mean an animal. So it's kind of a play on that, right? Or like beast. Creatures capable of giving birth by themselves without the civilized intervention of professionals. When he buys their excuse, the incongruous encounter between the king of all Egypt and the midwives to the slaves exposes Pharaoh as a fool. It's like very witty and shrewd. Whether or not he realizes this, right?
Really is a fool.
Yes. But what I really want to explore here is this idea of what it was like for these midwives to be courageous in this moment. And there's two different streams of thought when it comes to the midwives because of the words that were bolded up above, because of the words here, milyaldot ha'ivriot. These words, the Hebrew midwives. When we look at the words Hebrew midwives, it can be understood in one of two ways, right? One is that they are midwives who happen to be Hebrews. The other is that they're not necessarily Hebrews, but they are a midwife. They are midwives to the Hebrews. And so depending on how we look at this text and how we read those two words really changes what it was about their actions that made it particularly courageous. So I'm going to take us through both of these. The first is this idea that they were in fact Hebrews, and this is not the only text that speaks to that. There's actually several of them, but we're only going to read this one right now. There's lots of names in here. I'm not going to ask anyone to read it because I don't want you to have to worry about the names. So I'll read this one, but the next one I'd love to have someone volunteer. Okay, so this comes from the Talmud. And it says, the verse states, and the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name of the one was Shifra, and the name of the other was Pua. Rav and Shmuel disagree as to the proper interpretation of this verse. One says the midwives were a woman and her daughter, and one says that they were a daughter-in-law and her mother-in-law. According to the one who says that they were a woman and her daughter, the women were Yocheved, the mother of Moses and Aaron, and her daughter Miriam. So it's saying those are other names for them, or Shifra and Pua. And according to the one who says it's daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, it's referring to Yocheved and her daughter-in-law Elisheva, the wife of Aaron. So it's saying these Hebrew midwives, they were given other names, but they are not only Hebrews, they're actually pretty well-known members of the Hebrew people. Yeah, Michael.
I just wanted to know, regardless of their relationships, I'm wondering, the Shipra, what are there meanings of the names Shipra and Pua? Do they mean something in Hebrew that would help us to, understand who they are and what they've done better?
Yes, there actually is a bunch of text relating to that, and I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. It had to do with creating something beautiful for Shifra. Yes, there is a whole text around that. I just need my brain to go into gear so that I can remember exactly what it was. But there was a context. Rashi speaks to it. I'm just trying to remember exactly what it was.
Well, what is more beautiful than the birth of a child?
Exactly.
I mean, and that's why I feel that women appreciate that a lot more than men do. because they're involved in the actual process of the pregnancy and eventually to the birth, and seeing a new person being brought into the world. So that is really beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. I think I remembered it in this book somewhere. So I was just trying to find it for you, but I can also look for it later.
Okay.
I'm just drawing a blank at the moment for some reason, even though I know this stuff. Yeah, okay. I will look at it later. Sorry.
No
But it's a
problem.
great question.
Thank you.
If they in fact were leaders among the Hebrews, like what was so courageous about the act of speaking up as they did? Or what is specifically courageous about them being the ones to speak up?
They were the ones who were told to kill the male infants.
Yes.
So it was not that the mothers were told to kill their infants. The midwives were told to kill their infants. So they were the ones in direct line of descent from Pharaoh's orders. So they received Pharaoh's orders and they stood up against him. And that makes them, I think, the most courageous people, because they defied Pharaoh's orders.
Yes.
I think. You know,
Yeah, I
okay.
Hold on. I'm going to go right back to Michael, and then I want to follow up on what you're saying, Jessica. I found what I had remembered from before. So Shifra is Yocheved because she makes Mishaperet, the child, shapely. It's because of her role as a midwife in delivering like a healthy child, essentially. And Pua is Miriam because she purrs, Pua, talks and coos to the child, comforting it. That's what Rashi says. I remembered Rashi said something. I just can't remember exactly what it was. So there you go. That's how the names connect.
Thank you. Comforting. Okay.
Now, going back to what Jessica, what you were saying about just like, yeah, they're disobeying a direct order. But if it truly is Miriam and Yocheved, right, for them to stand up and to blatantly kind of go against the orders when they are as well known as they were, could potentially put them in incredible danger.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like they could hide in with other people. Like, they're very well known. Everyone knows who they are. So there's a lot of special courage that comes with that. And also, if we were to look at it from the other perspective, that perhaps they weren't, excuse me, perhaps they weren't Miriam and Yocheved, or they weren't Elisheba and Yocheved, they were actually people from the Egyptians. There's the other special kind of courage that would go along with those actions, right? So I want us to look at a couple of these texts. There's 3 of them here, I believe. So Josephus, who's basically an ancient historian, he gives us a lot of insight into so many things from ancient times. He says, alarmed threat, the king, on the sage's advice, ordered that every male child born to the Israelites should be destroyed by being cast into the river, and that the labors of Hebrew women with child should be observed and watch kept for their delivery by the Egyptian midwives. For this office was, by his orders, to be performed by women who, as patriots of the king, were not likely to transgress his will. They wouldn't ask Hebrews. They'd expect Hebrews to do something to protect their own. Instead, they're trying to find someone among the Egyptians who's more likely to truly follow through with this. And Imre Noam, which is a later commentary, says, Shifra and Pua were originally Egyptians who embraced Judaism. Otherwise, how could Pharaoh have ordered them to kill Jews? How could they in the first place have agreed? Surely every Jew is obliged to sacrifice his life rather than idolatry, incest, or murder. That is why the text observes the midwives feared God, implying that previously, when they were still heathens, this wording is obviously not wording that I personally would pick, they had not feared him. Had they not been Egyptians, what would have been the point of telling us that they feared God? Surely as Jewesses, that was taken for granted. But though Pharaoh had offered them bribes, they refused to accept them. The text would accordingly have to be read not the Hebrew midwives, but midwives of the Hebrews. So it's kind of insisting that they were actually Egyptians who were called for this sacred task, and that was a big deal. And the last piece here, this actually comes from our Devar Torah inside the Musar Torah commentary, where Rabbi Amy Eilberg says, these were Egyptian midwives who helped Israelite women give birth. They were Pharaoh's own subjects who he expected to obey his command without question. According to this explanation, these Egyptian women reached across national and religious divides, feeling human and moral solidarity with their sisters, the Israelite women, in a bond stronger than their allegiance to their own king.
Cool.
It's powerful wording, isn't it?
Really cool.
And the Pharaoh's also considered God too, right? Pharaoh was considered a god, so they're disobeying their God or what.
Yeah, that some things are bigger. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So what is especially courageous if they were in fact Egyptian women? What makes this so remarkable?
They took a chance here. They could be harmed, and they went against what their king, dictated that they do. So they were courageous in that they did the right thing. They felt with their heart and their morals that this was not the right thing to do. And it takes a lot of courage to defy someone who has a lot of power over you, and do the right thing.
Yeah. And even just in that line earlier on, right? Like, of course that the Pharaoh would have chosen Egyptians, because then it would be clear that they would have allegiance to him. And so he could trust them to actually follow through with it. He never suspected that they would do the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they were also recognizing the oneness and the bond that they had, like Betzel Elohim, and seeing that these little children and babies were really one with them as well.
Beautiful. And that goes back to what was said at the very beginning, right? About being courageous, being kind of having our hearts open as opposed to closed off.
Mm-hmm.
Any other thoughts here? These are such beautiful insights and kind of perspectives.
Yeah, I have one thought. A woman in childbirth is probably the most fragile of human beings. I'm not quite sure what the word is, but she is the most possibly
Like vulnerable?
Vulnerable. Thank you. Yes, of all the people in the universe, a woman in childbirth is the most vulnerable person in the world, because she's not only herself, but her baby. She's bringing a child into the world, and so to help a woman in childbirth, and to do that against any laws that may be promulgated is amazing. That kind of courage is amazing. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, thank
Sorry.
you.
The other thing, can you hear me?
Yes.
The other thing I'd like to add is that I think that sometimes we think we're being courageous when we show fidelity towards a political party, family member, anybody that's in our group. But I think that true courage, which is exemplified here, goes outside of the group. That's very, very difficult to do because it doesn't come always naturally. And so again, there's that angst of having to, sometimes courage means you have to buck up against the group and go outside of that to show love and compassion towards other people that, you wouldn't be expected to have compassion for, or so you have to take that leap. It requires so much risk because you could even be hurting the bonds that you have with others by doing that. So
yeah, like if these midwives were Jews, we would almost expect these acts, however courageous they were, and they absolutely would be incredibly courageous acts. But for an Egyptian to do this,
right.
It's totally on another level, right? Because they aren't part of the Jewish people. They are putting everything they know, every safety net, everything completely on the line because something internally is telling them this is the right thing to do. I have to do it.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted to just say one thing that really moved me. I think it was this past week. And we're talking about strength and courage, that I think the Congressional Medal of Honor was given to 4 or more heroes of different wars, that they put their own lives at risk, and some died saving the lives of others. And it really, moved me so much to hear what these men did to save their fellow officers, whatever it is, from burning vehicles, and then it just goes beyond. And so when we talk about strength and courage, I think kind of like the ultimate is a hero who, in every sense of what that means and what that entailed.
Yeah. This week, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. If you want to go ahead.
No, please, Frank, go ahead.
Strength and that courage that Michael was just talking about, like of me and my fellow soldiers are going to go take this mountain, and there's some incidents that happen, and there's this glory there, but saving an infant who will never remember you, doesn't know you did that, is like the ultimate, right? Yeah. That's the humility of, like, that baby's never going to know you saved that baby's life. The mother might remember, but in childbirth, they don't, but just to know that, like, you're saving someone that's probably can't pay you back, and you might not get glory from anyone for doing that by just being quiet about the baby being born, the boy being born. So that was what I was getting out of that. And I liked what Michael was saying too.
Yeah. It's so interesting because it seems like all of these midot, they all come back to anava. They all come back to humility. Like standing up to Pharaoh saying, those Israelites, they scare me, let's subdue them. That is coming from a place of arrogance. A soldier going and saving a life, not needing necessarily to be recognized for that extreme act of courage. That is all about humility and just care and compassion.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thanks for recentering us on that, because I think it all does very much come from a place of humility.
Yeah.
There's a couple of quotes here and things that I just want to bring in. Several of them are from the reading, because I don't know about you, but I was really moved by the reading this week and the way in which it contextualized all of this. The first text that I wanted to bring in was something from Pirkei Avot, where it talks about this idea of Omet's lev, of this strengthened heart. says, Judah ben Tema says, be strong as a leopard, swift as an eagle, as fleet as a gazelle, as brave as a lion, to do the will of your Father who is in heaven. He used to say, the arrogant is headed for Gehenna, and the blushing for the Garden of Eden. So it's speaking to the same idea, right? Arrogance doesn't actually, that's not courage. Courage is humility.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
I'm trying to connect that with the courage of the midwives. Were they strong as eagles? And sorry, I missed some of that. Oh, okay. Swift as eagles, strong as leopards, fleet as gazelles. I don't think so. They were just there to help women in childbirth.
I think they were as brave as a lion.
Yeah.
Brave as a lion. Yes, probably that's true. Yes, brave as a lion.
And they were swift
Certainly.
to trick they were swift in tricking the Pharaoh. That's another swiftness.
Yes.
I see that.
There is. Yeah.
They responded very, very quickly. Like they knew what they wanted to say, and they tricked him because of it.
Okay. Yeah. They were fleet. They were.
Exactly. Like, I guess there's different ways to do these things, right? And it shows up differently at a time of war than it does with midwives trying to protect someone than it does in everyday life. I mean, this week, I don't know how many people are like tapped into what's going on within the Reform movement right now. There's been quite a lot going on within Reform Judaism as a whole. So one thing is that, what was it, a month and a half ago, there was a report that came out of HUC, which is the seminary, about different types of misconduct and sexual misconduct in some cases, or discrimination towards LGBTQ or towards women or towards people with disabilities. There was this huge report that came out, and the people who spoke up, I think, had incredible courage to do so. Because as we know, stepping up and saying something, you can put everything on the line in order to do that. There's retaliation that can come with that. There can be just so many consequences that come with it. And yesterday, another report came out, and that report was from the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is the rabbinical association that I'm a part of, where the CCAR started talking through and really having this report to think about in which ways are our ethics contracts, is that up to snuff, and in which ways do we need to get better? And there's incredible humility, I think, in stepping back and saying, okay, we acknowledge something is wrong here. We allowed terrible things to happen. Now we need to really talk to it and allow people's voices to be heard. And so I want you to know that there are some real acts of Omet's love that are going on within our movement right now, and it doesn't undo the pain and the hurt that has happened. But the fact that our movement is willing to go into those really scary places and to talk to it and work on it gives me hope for the future. Okay, so I want us just to go to a couple of these really beautiful quotes that Amy Eilberg brought in. Would anyone like to read the first one at the top over there? It's shorter than the other ones.
I'll read.
Thank you so much, Sari.
Okay, moral courage, women of moral courage, strength of will is complex and sometimes dangerous quality, which can easily drift into conceit and obstinacy, the very opposite of much praised quality of humility. In our own lives, when we sense power and urgency arising in our hearts, how are we to know whether we are acting for God's will, like the biblical Shifra and Pua, or whether we are motivated by desire for fame, admiration, or personal gratification?
It's a hard question, isn't it?
I think it points to what I was saying before about the angst. I do know people, myself included at times, I think we all can probably attest to that, that there are times when we feel very passionately about something and we are not really angsty about talking about our opinion or putting ourselves out there, no matter what or who it might hurt peripherally. I do know people that are very involved in different social movements, and they are caught up in the fact that other people aren't on the same page as they are. They can be very aggressive in their stance and almost really undermine the message that they're trying to give. I think it's really easy to get caught up in that when we feel passionately about what it is that we believe in. But I do think that that kind of pause, that angst is important, is an important piece to keep us humble, that we should always question, are we doing what is truly God's will? And when we think that we are, and we're so sure of it, I think that's the time to really question sometimes too, and sit back and talk to somebody else and get some kind of discernment about what it is that we're doing, because I just think it's easy to fall into that energy. So
maybe we need each other for that centering sometimes.
I think so. I think if we're just going out there alone and thinking we're all completely by ourselves, and I'm not so sure that's always the best route to go. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Was there someone else who wanted to say something there? Michael, did you?
Yeah. But, don't we all learned or should have learned in our early years the differences between right and wrong, and when we, and because we know them, we have to, I think that there is a truth to everything. And yet last time or the time before, we talked about modifying the truth to not hurt another person's feelings in a way. But in this case, if we know that what our acts are now or are going to be, if they are appropriate and for the right purpose, then we are trying to do, and we're doing God's will in this sense. So it's just others that desire this business of fame, admiration, and personal gratification that may act in a certain way, but the rest of us I'm sure would be probably acting on the right path to do the right thing.
It's interesting, Michael, like the Jewish texts talk to how every human being has different aspects of ourselves, right? And we all have like the Yetzer HaTov, which is this kind of, generous version of ourselves, this loving version of ourselves that's focused on others primarily, right? And then at the same time, we also have Yetzer Hara, which is the part of ourselves filled with ambition, the part of ourselves that wants to be recognized, the part of ourselves that, pushes us to do extraordinary things. And for every single person, it plays out a little bit differently, how Yetzer Hara and how Yetzer HaTov kind of play out in our lives. So it strikes me that it's not necessarily that there are some people who have lots of Yetzer Hara, but rather all of us have it. We just kind of cope with it and deal with it differently. And when it's really out of whack in any direction, according to Musar, if you go too far in either direction, there are some big problems, right? So it sounds like what you're talking to, Michael, are the people who are so far on the Yetzer Hara side that they've actually lost touch with the Yetzer HaTov, and they're struggling, they're out of alignment. And so they're making choices that aren't good for themselves or anyone else around them.
Thank you.
Yeah. Just building off of what Michael said, I think it's interesting in the Musar readings, it's constantly, each one of these midot, have two sides to them, right? So, in that balance is always, so it's the courage and the zeal that you're going after that tempered by love, or the, truth tempered by, the humility, or justice and compassion, right? And so we're always I guess we're called to manage that balance in ourselves, and everybody's levels are all different, right? Just, in our DNA. So that's really interesting how they, kind of they go through that with each one, and you kind of relook at it from that perspective.
Yeah, Tom, that's a beautiful kind of tie-in with this next reading also, what both of you were saying, because that's exactly what Amy Alberg talks about here, right? For Omet's Lev, the key to such balance lies in the term itself. So wanting to try to find balance with Omet's Lev, not too much on one side, not too much on the other. Omet's Lev is a quality of strength, power, and willingness to speak truth to power and to defy community expectations, as we had mentioned before, right? But Omet's Lev is also a quality of the heart, strength, tempered by love, gentleness, and the desire of the well-being of all. We can easily err by leaning toward one extreme or the other. On the one hand, timidity in the face of moral challenge means that we miss opportunities to partner with God in the work of perfecting the world. Allowing the disapproval of others or fear of getting it wrong prevent us from doing the work of justice and enables the hand of those who pursue injustice. Becoming lost in fearfulness and uncertainty or confusion makes us complicit in the evils perpetrated all around us. Lacking trust in ourselves, we fail to imagine how important our intervention can be as a response to divine justice for all, to the divine call for justice. On the other hand, the call for justice can be an adrenaline surge, a rush of angry energy born of psychological components disconnected from the people on whose behalf we wish to act. We really dig into this. This is such important stuff and so difficult, right? When we are driven by impulsive boldness that is unsoftened by the energies of the heart, we run the risk of crusading for our own glory rather than for the greater good. Such boldness is propelled by our own needs rather than devotion to God's desires for the world. Discerning the path of Omet's Lev, courage born of love and devotion, is a delicate dance for us, especially in times when moral courage surrounds us. Moral challenges surround us, But the tradition gives us models and directions to guide our determination to boldly do our part in creating a more just and loving world. That quote right there, I think, is the greatest power of this particular Devar Torah. It's what spoke to me. I don't know if it's what spoke to you.
Yeah, definitely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about in this paragraph.
Yeah, and what I found so powerful about it is that it not only shows the different ways in which Omet Lev can be off kilter, because but it also talks to the psychological reasons why we might justify it being off kilter, right? Like, we're afraid to speak up. That requires so much. We might feel timid. We might not believe that we are strong enough. We see in this Torah portion, right? Like, God calls to Moses and says, hey, Moses, go free the people. And Moses said, but I'm of slow speech. I can't possibly, you don't want me, pick someone else, please, but he ends up rising to it, but it takes a little while. He's timid. He's not quite sure. He's not willing to buy into it. And on the other end, I think that there are so many things that we can relate to in this idea of getting so wrapped up in things that we jump on board and we're fighting without perhaps even understanding the nuances, and sometimes actually creating more harm than good because we're so focused on our own sense of, wanting to do something that we're not focused on the work that needs to be done.
I think that in the past, we have talked about pausing, taking time to think and reflect, and thereby doing it for the right reasons and for the greater good. And as I get older, I really am acting on that. I'm really not as impulsively just saying what I want to say, just taking time to think and how will it help, you know, and in what way can I say it or do, you know, do something to correct the situation, but in a way that it's not destructive. So I think pausing, like we talked in the past, and reflecting is such an important thing. And I think we could gain balance doing that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. All of these different midot, they're so intermingled, aren't they? So thank you for like refocusing on that aspect of silence and taking time.
Yeah, one thing I would say that really jumped out at me is if we're of the mindset that, you know, we can do God's work and we can make the world a better place, and God can do that through us. If that's kind of where we're coming from, you know, the sentence here, timidity in the face of moral challenge, means that we miss opportunities to partner with God in the work of perfecting the world. I mean, that, because in our real lives and our everyday lives, complacency, we're pulled in so many directions, you know, we just don't have the energy sometimes to deal with things that we know, you know, need to be dealt with or would be helpful. So that, to me, for me, you know, is a real, you know, impactful sentence.
You know, I was going to say that too, when I do a lot of activism, and the one thing I have to remember sometimes is, and someone taught me this, the word stay, you know, STAY, stop thinking about yourself. And like anytime I'm in an argument, and especially if someone comes at me, I want to lash out, not physically, but with my mouth, verbally. And usually it's going to be my fears are going to come out first. If I don't think about, if I stop, or if I just go, it's going to be my fears that I want to prove you wrong. I want to do this. Instead of thinking, let me stop thinking about myself. This person probably thinks they have a valid point, even though they have no idea what they're talking about. But let me stop and think about that for 1 second, and don't think about myself, about how this argument or trying to win this debate or trying to prove my family members wrong who are Trumpers or whatever. Let me just stop thinking about myself, think about them, and think about what are they coming from. And for whatever reason, and I'll say this one last thing, is it always works. The other thing is, like, when I want to tell somebody who I think is doing something wrong, and I want to go tell everybody, you know, that guy's doing something wrong. I learned that if I keep my mouth shut, the rest of the world figures it out on its own. And I just sit back, right? And it's been the amazing gift that Hashem has given me. So anyway, discernment again with that. So, all right, I'll shut up. Sorry.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much, Frank.
That's great.
Marla, you looked for a second like you wanted to say something. I just want to give you the opportunity. Okay. I don't mean to call you out. I just thought you wanted to say something. Well, I think that there is just so much to wrestle with in everything that we've been looking at today. And so I just want to, actually, I had one last text here that I did want to go to. Hold on, I'm going to share the screen one last time. I had forgotten. Hold on. This way we can end on this. But this is Mark Magolis from the Institute of Jewish Spirituality, who said, as we grow in awareness of our inner strength, we also realize this strength can be directed toward both positive and harmful ends. Jewish tradition teaches us to connect to Omet's lev with the quality of chesed, or loving kindness, concern for others. According to a midrash, there is no real courage in using one's strength to push someone into a pit or off of a roof. True courage consists of seizing the hand of one about to fall, or lifting someone who has already fallen. Cultivating Omet's lev means applying our energy to protect and stand up for those who are at risk, including ourselves. We practice Omet's lev whenever we leave our comfort zone, take an unpopular stand, expose our vulnerabilities, speak the truth, confront others, risk embarrassment or personal loss, or intervene on behalf of those unable to do so for themselves. And so the last question I want us to leave with, as we're coming very close to the end of 2021, is for us just to think about internally how we want to develop Omet's Lev within ourselves in the coming year. So I want to thank you all so much for this really, really intriguing conversation. Every single person here adds so much to the conversation. Even your presence, if you didn't speak up, adds a lot. So thank you for being here. I look forward to Torah study next week as we move a little further into the book of Exodus. Yes, we will have Torah study next week. And so you'll get an email either Wednesday night or Thursday morning, just depending on how my week is going. But I look forward to seeing you then, if not before.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye now.
everybody.